As Arkansas's population grows, so do our energy demands. But with the right mix of resources, reliable, affordable power will always be a reality. These resources are all around us in our rivers, blowing through our trees, even right below our feet. The answer isn't focusing on one resource, it's embracing them all. The electric cooperatives of Arkansas know that a balanced approach to power builds our communities and powers our dreams. Visit themixmatters.com and see why there's power in knowledge.
Let's talk about your primary. You actually got a surprise primary challenger. Lynette Bryant says she's going to run against you in the Democratic primary. First of all, how surprised were you by Lynette Bryant's entry into the race? And have you had a conversation with her since then?
I bumped into her at a couple of events. It's been a friendly conversation on both of those occasions. And look, anybody that's committed to try and make Arkansas a better place to live, work, and raise a family, I welcome them to the race. Anyone that feels called to public service, certainly they should run, and I respect that, and look forward to a campaign where I can talk about my positive vision for the future of the state.
You weren't counting on her getting in, though, obviously. You were probably expecting to be able to kind of bank some money for the general election. Maybe speak to that a little bit. And do you think that there is an expectation that if you don't win big in this primary, that it will show that there is a lack of support for your candidacy out there?
Oh, not at all. I mean, I think that's silly. I think you know, the Democratic primary, Republican primary are two totally separate races from the election in November. I think you can expect unfortunately, a relatively low turnout in both the Democratic and Republican primaries. I think we'll see a very heavy turnout in the election that really matters, and that's the general election in November. But look, there's 3 million people in Arkansas. Anybody can file for office that wants to. We thought there was going to be 3 or 4 on the Republican side. There ended up with, what, 2? A lot of people thought I was going to go unopposed in the Democratic primary, and we ended up with an opponent. And we're fine with that. It gives us more opportunities to do programs like this and to talk about how we've got to really focus on education, jobs, and lower fair taxes.
You've been positioning yourself all through this campaign as an independent voice for Arkansas, not playing up your Democratic label. Is there some perception that you have that the Democratic brand is damaged here in Arkansas? Why not speak to your Democratic, your Democratic root?
Well, I think everybody knows that I've always been a conservative, pro-business, pro-gun Democrat. Look, I think one of the reasons I left Congress, I was fed up with how partisan and dysfunctional it had become. The last thing we want is for it to become partisan and dysfunctional at the state level. And I think most people like me are just fed up with the partisan bickering that goes on in Washington. And the last thing we want is to see that in our state capital. So look, I'm not running to be governor for the Democratic Party. I'm not running to be governor for the Republican Party. I'm running to be governor for all the people in this state. There's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And my experience, my temperament, I believe is well suited to work with anyone who wants to work with me to make life even better for our children and grandchildren in this great state of ours.
Let's talk about some of the fun independent expenditure ads that are airing across Arkansas about you. Basically, the Republican Governors Association's been spending close to $1 million to...
$1.1 million in 5 weeks, I believe.
Boy, you've been counting? You've been adding it all up. All right. Nancy Pelosi led, Mike Ross followed. They call you the go-to guy for Nancy Pelosi. How would you characterize your relationship with Nancy Pelosi from your time in Congress?
Well, National Journal consistently listed me as one of the most independent members of Congress for each of the 12 years I was there. There's been a lot of stories written about the Blue Dog Democrats, the conservative Democrats, and how many problems they created for her. I was the co-chair of the group back when we were 54 members strong. Look, there's 435 members of Congress. I don't believe anybody really believes that a country boy from Prescott, Arkansas, with an A+ rating from the National Rifle Association was Pelosi's go-to guy. That's absurd. In fact, look, they have spent $1.1 million in 5 weeks misrepresenting the facts, distorting the truth, and lying about me and my record. That's the bad news. The good news is they wouldn't be doing that 7, 8 months before the election if I was losing. And it's not working. People aren't buying that at all, and you know it's part of the game that you part of the attacks that you get leveled against you when you run. But look, I thought about this before I ran, and I'm willing to take the hits if that's what it takes for us to have better education, better jobs, and lower fair taxes in Arkansas.
But if you hear it long enough and loud enough, it does start to sink into the psyche of a voter that they will believe that if they're not hearing a counter message out there. I mean, that's just a fact of politics.
They don't know how to run against a conservative, pro-business, pro-gun Democrat, so all they know to do is to try to nationalize this race and try to link me to Pelosi and Obama. And you know, we've all seen the ads. Facts don't lie, and the truth is, I was consistently listed as one of the most independent members of Congress. I got an A+ rating with the National Rifle Association. The only time Pelosi had an opponent, I gave the nominating speech for her opponent. So I think really what is important to come out of all of this, $1.1 million worth of out-of-state money on TV ads in the last 5 weeks, is this: if they will lie to you in a TV ad, can you really trust them as governor?
There's going to be the same amount of ammunition coming from the Democratic side, though, eventually. There'll be independent expenditure groups saying some things that arguably are going to stretch the facts and the truth about whoever the Republican nominee is as well. I mean, will you come out and oppose that when those types of attacks are launched against whoever your eventual opponent is?
I can't control what outside groups do. All I can control is the Mike Ross for Governor.
You can take a stand. You could take a stand against it.
To spend the next 7 months talking about my positive vision for the future of the state that starts with education and job creation.
But will you, if you see something that you think is unfair about your opponent, will you go on the record as saying that that's not a truthful ad if it's an outside group?
Absolutely. I'm not going to condone any ads that are not truthful.
Let's talk about the private option, the biggest public policy debate that the state of Arkansas has really had over the past year. It's going to be a huge issue for the next governor of the state of Arkansas. You've been strongly supportive of the private option. Is there anything that gives you pause for concern about the private option? Are there things that you want to see changed? Could you see a different way of conducting that particular piece of policy?
Look, I have said since day one, and understand, I voted against Obamacare 4 times. I voted to repeal it 23 times. But from day one, I've said I would have voted for the Medicaid expansion, the so-called private option. I would have signed it into law, and as governor, I will protect it. Up until a few weeks ago, Asa Hutchinson's only response to the media was that he was still reading it. Well, this was not the authorization. This was the reauthorization. This was passed a year ago, and a year later, he's still reading it? Really? And then when he did make a statement, he basically said that it's the law of the land, whatever that means, and that it's nothing more than a pilot. Well, the more than 100,000 working Arkansans who now have access to health care, for our struggling rural hospitals that are barely keeping their doors open, and I understand that because we lost the hospital in my hometown back in the 90s. They don't believe this is a pilot project. And look, it's the right thing to do. It saves the state $89 million a year. It helps save our rural hospitals, and it provides health care to working Arkansans. I mean, these aren't the people that don't want to work. They already qualify for Medicaid. The Medicaid expansion or the private option are the people that are trying to do the right thing and stay off welfare, but they're working the jobs with no benefits.
You'll fight for it, though, is what you're telling me today.
Absolutely.
That you're not going to let a legislature wind it down, undo it, push it back. You see it as good public policy. You'll fight to keep it.
It is good public policy. It's good, sound fiscal policy, and it's the right thing to do. And I will do everything I can as governor to protect it, while Asa Hutchinson says, you know, it's a pilot project and we'll see. I don't think that's good enough for the 200,000 people who've made application and the more than 100,000 who already have coverage today because of it. Look, I was recently at the hospital in Jonesboro and talking to the chairman of the board there at the hospital. Just in January alone, it meant about $1.5 million to that little hospital in Jonesboro. And that was $1.5 million they were writing off to bad debt last year. And so We've got sales tax elections going on in places like Stuttgart and West Memphis trying to keep their hospital doors open. This is a huge issue for hospitals, and here's why. Obamacare, which again I voted against 4 times, voted to repeal it 23 times.
Supported a version of health care reform, though, in the House.
Well, the Republicans like to talk about a bill that occurred 8 months earlier. Obamacare, look it up, was a Senate bill, never went through my committee, voted against it 4 times, voted to repeal it 23 times. I came home, I listened to the people and did what the people in my district asked me to do. But my point is this, whether you like it or not, Obamacare over here made cuts to Medicare, not to the seniors, but to reimbursements for hospitals. And then they made the argument, which I didn't buy, and that's why I voted against it, was that they would help make them whole again over here with this Medicaid expansion, because they're going to start getting compensated for people they've been getting uncompensated and been writing off.
And then the Supreme Court ruling basically said the states could decide their own Medicaid.
Absolutely. It's the only part of Obamacare we have any control over. So the bottom line is this, that the cuts to hospitals are occurring over here as part of Obamacare, whether we do the Medicaid expansion or not, and to help offset the damage done to our rural hospitals by Obamacare, we help make them whole again over here with this Medicaid expansion, or so-called private option. And look, this thing is so far removed from Obamacare that the state of Arkansas had to go to the federal government and get a waiver to implement it.
Let's change our topics. Let's talk about tax reform. You've put out a couple of different policies. You've advocated for a manufacturing tax cut, roughly about $40 million if it were to be done in whole. You've advocated for this income tax restructuring plan, which would be about $575 million if done all at one time, which I know is not your case for doing that. But do you think you've overpromised on tax reform? I mean, could you say you're throwing too much out there that you really can't deliver on over maybe not even in a 4-year or 8-year period?
No, I think it's very comparable to what Governor Beebe proposed back in 2006, and this debate is going a lot the same way that it did in 2006. As you recall, Asa Hutchinson was running for governor in 2006. In fact, he's been running for statewide office in each of the last 4 decades. And in 2006, Asa Hutchinson said, we're going to get rid of the sales tax on groceries. We're going to do it all in year 1. Well, we all know what happened in 2007. We had the worst economic recession since World War II. We would still be digging our way out of debt had we done that. Governor Beebe correctly said, no, we're going to get rid of the sales tax on groceries, but we're going to phase it out as the state can afford it. What I'm saying is that we need lower fair taxes. We have 6 state income tax brackets that determine the state income tax rate that you pay. And yet 60% of working Arkansans are in the top 2 brackets. 1 out of 3 are in the top bracket. How did that happen? The brackets were established in 1971. They weren't indexed for inflation. In 71, median household income was $8,000 a year. Today, still too low, $40,000 a year. We started indexing the brackets for inflation in 1997, but we never addressed that 25-year period before that, and so that's why it's so out of whack.
And that's the gist of what you want to do with it.
The bottom line is this. I know that sounds complicated. Let me just simplify it. A single mom working 2 jobs trying to make ends meet, making $34,000 a year, should not be paying the same state income tax rate as someone making $340,000 a year or someone making $3.4 million a year. We're going to phase it in as the state can afford it. Asa says he's going to cut the state income tax $100 million, then worry about funding the budget. I'm saying we're going to fund education, Medicaid, public safety. We're going to balance the budget, and then as we can afford it, we're going to implement this plan. That's exactly what Governor Beebe's done with the sales tax on groceries. Asa said it would never get done. There's no timeline. Well, guess what? You know, in Governor Beebe's last year in office, 80% of the sales tax on groceries has now been taken off. We always have revenue growth, except for in times of a recession. And so there's always going to be revenue growth that will help pay for this, and we're going to phase it in as the state can afford it, and we're going to begin by helping those who need the help most first.
Not to argue his position for him, but Asa Hutchinson has said repeatedly that this $100 million income tax cut he wants to do from growth revenue is what he's talked about.
He has said from surplus.
He's also said from growth revenue, that the additional money that has come from the state.
Well, the only time I've heard him talk about it, he's talked about using the surplus, which you can't do, of course. I mean, I was in the state Senate. He's never been within state government before. All of his time was in Washington, D.C. But, you know, surplus funds, you don't do permanent spending. You don't do permanent tax relief with surplus funds. That's a one-time event. You do it with revenue growth, and if you want to get real technical, you do it with net revenue growth.
Do you have any other plans to offer tax reform or tax cutting proposals beyond the manufacturing tax cut you proposed, beyond the individual income tax reform you proposed?
No, that's our tax reform package, and it's more detailed than we can talk about in this interview. I would encourage people to go read my entire lower fair tax plan at MikeRoss.com. The manufacturing sales tax exemption, that will make us more competitive with surrounding states. Asa Hutchinson said it sounded like something that President Obama would propose. No, actually it was proposed and recommended by the Arkansas Chamber of Commerce.
Let's talk about you are running as a ticket with John Burkhalter, who you've endorsed. He's endorsed you. He's had some reports in the media about some legal charges that have been the result of a lawsuit. Does that give you some pause for concern?
No, I mean, look, John is self-made. His dad was a government worker. He's been very successful in life as a businessman. And anytime you're in business, you're going to have some lawsuits. And you know, I've reviewed that and read about it, and it looks like to me it's nothing more than a he said, she said. And at the end of the day, the judge ordered that John receive a whole lot more money than the guy making these wild accusations. And so I just think it's sour grapes, and unfortunate that it's being turned into some type of political issue, because it's really not.
Does not shake your confidence in him as a lieutenant governor candidate. Should that office be abolished?
No, of course not.
It's out there in the public discussion.
Yeah, look, here's what I think. I think we need a governor and a lieutenant governor that can work together. Rather than the lieutenant governor sitting around waiting for the governor to die, I think the lieutenant governor should be focused on economic development, work with the governor, work with the cabinet, and because my goal is to have an educated, trained, and skilled workforce, and then do a better job of letting America and letting the world know that Arkansas is open for business.